Right, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to come and learn about talking with the animals. Although it's not just animals I'm going to be speaking with you about. Officially, what I do is called interspecies communication. And that's not a foreign concept to Findhorn for very obvious reasons to do with, well, about 50 years ago, 50 years and some months. Interspecies communication is something that we all can do, so I'm not here to be regarded as, special or having been dropped on my head as a baby. It's about us all connecting with this intuitive ability we have within ourselves. We may happen to have a particular passion for animals or plants, perhaps the trees or even the elements like the oceans. And this form of communication really applies in so many different ways. But let me start with some of the founding statements that underpin our modern way of thinking, rather unfortunately. Aristotle, one of our fathers of philosophy, has implied that nature is just here for our purpose. And René Descartes, one of the founding fathers of our modern scientific system, has had very similar things to say, calling ourselves, humans, the lords and possessors of nature. And this is where we humans, well, even before then actually, this is where we began to separate from and try to regard ourselves as better than the other species. We use technology, we use our brain size and functioning as arguments to support this theory, but it's just a theory. It's just a theory that we made up, that there's some imaginary hierarchy of life, and we happen to be at the very top of this hierarchy. But no one else said it was so, except ourselves, so it hardly seems very objective, does it? At these very critical times, we know for all sorts of reasons that the Earth and our fellow beings, our wild relatives and those that live closer to us are really struggling under the so-called supremacy of our human species. And a whole different way is going to have to be founded. Einstein was a very, very wise man beyond his mathematics and his physics. He really understood that when you take science to its limit, you eventually come up against something more. You come up against something bigger than the empirical and measurable sciences. And he knew, and we are now experiencing, that we have to invent a whole new way of thinking and being and relating to get through this evolutionary crisis. Else we're just going to drag all the other species down with us. So what is this world that we're actually living in? It's not physical. It's not about the way flowers look. It's not about how many legs an animal has. It's not even about a teacup or a person. Really, on a building block level, we are all made up of exactly the same stuff, which isn't actually stuff, it's energy. But at a quantum level, whether it's a leaf or a coffee mug or a person, we are just collections of quanta that come together to form atoms, which come together to form molecules, which come together to form increasingly complex beings. But at the fundamental building block level, we are all made up of exactly the same stuff. And so why wouldn't we be able to connect and communicate with other expressions of life? We are literally of the same energy. We are cut from the same cloth. We humans, having brains as we do, tend to think a lot, too much. And every thought or feeling has an electromagnetic consequence in our brain. Synapses fire, there are brainwave emissions, and these really have a frequency that can be perceived by any other aspect of the universe that tunes into us. Much like a cell phone tower or a radio tower that's constantly emitting waves, so we too as humans are walking through our days and the world emitting these waves energetically and on a brain level. But connecting with any other being we want to is not just a matter of the mind or this lump of gray matter we call our brain. It's also a matter of the heart, the wisdom of the heart, that feeling of unconditional love, and connecting from a place of kinship and recognition. So I'll talk more about that in a moment. The good news is that other animals, non-human animals, are automatically tuned in. They're very open. We know how our cats and dogs at home just know what we're thinking. And if we're feeling sad or bad on a particular day, they might come and show us a little comfort or treat us a little differently. Unfortunately, us modern humans have lost the ability to be aware of these things naturally. And we tend to focus only on spoken word and on language, but the animals all around us are constantly sensing us, and they know things automatically. They're very good at it. It's us who needs to adjust our frequency to get on the same wavelength as them. But animals are always receiving our real thoughts and feelings, and perhaps they're even suggesting some things to us as well. If you're sitting at home and suddenly have a thought pop into your head, you might be sitting in front of the TV or at your computer, and suddenly you find yourself getting up and walking through the kitchen, outside into the yard, picking up the empty dog's water bowl and filling it with water. It doesn't mean that you suddenly had the bright idea in the middle of your workday that the dog might be thirsty. What would have happened is that your thirsty dog is emitting these feelings and messages of thirst, and eventually you manage to get it on an energetic or a telepathic level. So animals are good at this. They're doing it all the time. These photos were taken on a wild dolphin workshop a couple of years back, where completely wild dolphins in the ocean choose to come up to swimmers and interact with us. And they have learned that us humans tend to be pretty silly about things and to think of contact as meaning physical contact of some kind. Look in how many cultures, isn't there, the shaking of hands or at the very least eye contact is some way of making connection, because we humans think that physical contact is the only way to make connection. And what I've experienced with these dolphins is that they know they're connected energetically, but when they come close to us, they emit the air bubbles out of their blowhole that is their signature pattern. Each dolphin has a little autograph that is a certain pattern of bubbles, and when they come and greet a person for the first time, they always emit their particular autograph, as if to say, "Hi, I'm Dolly." So animals are always adjusting to come into our ways of connecting. They know it's possible to connect energetically. It's really us humans who always think about things quite so physically. Quantum theory and Einstein's relativity theory talk a lot about how this energy transference is possible, and I'm not going to go into that too much now because there's lots and lots of reading material about it. But essentially, by directing our attention to another being, we have the ability to tune in and to be on the same wavelength. There's no accident in that expression. It's not just coincidental to say, be on the same wavelength as someone. It really means you're resonant. That's what attunement is all about. Our ancient ancestors knew about this very well. They didn't have to wake up in the morning and sit down in front of their fire and go into a deep meditation to try to connect with the animals. They just simply woke up and thought about the lion in Africa or thought about the kangaroo in Australia and would automatically get information coming into their minds spontaneously about where those animals were. People, too, when they were hunter-gatherers, used to know about the plants in these intuitive ways. They would know by direct communication with the plants which plants might be medicinal and be useful for healing and well-being, which might be toxic or which parts of the plant might be toxic, and which might be nourishment as food. And the medicine people of the tribe and the hunters and gatherers would communicate with the plants to ask them about their properties, and they would care for the plants. Our indigenous hunter-gatherer ancestors would also communicate with the collective consciousness of a certain species of animal. So if they wanted to go hunting tomorrow, then tonight they would sit in a state of prayer or communication, perhaps with the Kudu nation, and humbly, through prayer, communicate with all Kudu in the area and very respectfully request that one Kudu please show its tracks the next morning so they could follow the tracks because they really needed to feed their family for the next few months. They would always explain their need in a very humble way and never take more than they needed. And then about 12,000 years ago, we humans decided to keep animals behind fences and to grow crops and keep them also, keep more than we needed. And when we started hoarding and keeping more than we needed, we began to make them just resources for ourselves and not be in such a dynamic relationship and respectful relationship with them. There are still some indigenous cultures that carry forward these ways of honoring animals. In Nepal, there's an annual Day of the Dog where all dogs are honored. And everybody puts outside their homes water and food for the stray dogs to come and enjoy. And if the dogs come close enough, they decorate them with garlands of flowers and put turmeric on their foreheads and really revere and honor the animals. So too, there were very close relationships between the indigenous people in Africa and the wild animals too. These days, unfortunately, when we see documentaries, they usually are pitting man against beast and trying to make some big sensational battle of the whole thing, predator and prey. But at the times before modern times, there was a dynamic relationship and a very beautiful way of being, and even physical closeness was possible. Not that you should try this at home. So what is telepathy? It is direct communication. It's direct communication. The animal might be in the same room as you. The plant might be right in front of you in your garden. It's direct communication. You're not using some distant means of doing a psychic reading. It's a direct communication, like a conversation. And the dog will know that you're speaking with them telepathically, just as you will know. It's a two-way sending and receiving of information. It's completely natural. We know how sometimes we can just tell what someone's going to say before they say it. That's telepathy. So it's not something very new agey or weird or a special gift. We're not predicting the future. We're not in some astral traveling way, zooming ourselves over to remote locations to look down and see what's happening there. If we are connecting with an animal who is somewhere else than where we are, we're actually connecting energetically and then asking them to show us where they are or how they're feeling. It's all about directing our attention and our intention. For us humans, that often means eye contact. Some animals don't like eye contact. They take it as threatening, or they think it's a game, you know. So it doesn't have to be eye contact, but with animals who live close to people, like our domestic pets, they can often enjoy eye contact for short periods. With our eyes closed, we can still direct our intention to connect towards the one we want to connect with. Animals and plants are sentient beings. Now, a sentient being means one that can think for itself and is self-aware, very much aware of itself, of its individual expression in the universe. Unfortunately, mostly science doesn't really regard animals as conscious beings, so they go through all sorts of experiments to try to prove that. Cornell University had a study with elephants who have lived in the same yard in a zoo for several years. And one day they took the elephants away and sedated them and put a cross, a white cross, on the elephant's forehead, like you can see. They also put up a big 7-meter mirror in the elephant's yard, and then they woke the elephants up. And when the elephants were no longer sleepy, they went out into their yard. And of course, they went straight to the mirror, thinking, oh, new toy, you know. And they felt with their trunks behind the mirror. But within 90 seconds, they realized they could see their reflection in the mirror. And when they saw their reflection, the first thing the elephants did was, with their trunks, move to the cross on their own forehead and try to wipe away the mark. So this proves that they were understanding their reflection to be a two-dimensional representation of themselves and in reverse, you know, a mirror image. They didn't first try to wipe on the mirror. They straight away realized, whoa, there's something there that shouldn't be there, and tried to wipe the mark away with their own trunks. So animals are self-aware. Every bee in a beehive is aware of its own role and its own purpose. Every tree in a forest is very aware of its family of other trees and of itself, of its own needs and its own life. So plants and animals have their own roles and purposes. Perhaps the role of all cats is to find boxes. And animals have roles and purposes that may have nothing at all to do with us humans or what they're doing in our lives. You know, we so often are very grateful to animals for being guide dogs for the blind, or therapy animals, or horses that draw carts, or other animals that help us. But that doesn't mean their only purpose on the planet is to be in service to us humans. You know, what made us so special? What made us so important? Perhaps we are here to serve them as well. Perhaps we're here to help each other. And different species have got different perspectives about what's important to them, or about who they'd like to communicate with. We do know that cats tend to be more independent, but that doesn't mean that you might not have a kitty at home who's a very sociable herd animal who loves nothing more than to be in a big family and would love to be around other cats. We know that dogs and horses tend to like to group together and live in packs or in herds. That doesn't mean, though, that the horse or the dog in your life isn't a very independent soul who wants to live alone. We always need to remember that we're dealing with an individual, And we shouldn't be thinking about generalizations about the species or any prior knowledge. We can just simply ask the animals directly how they feel about themselves and hear straight from the horse's mouth. So another thing about animals being self-aware is that they are very able to express empathy, to feel with another being, and to have compassion as well. They can know and understand what it must be like to be feeling pain. They feel pain when a member of their family is feeling pain somewhere else. And it's not about brain size, clearly. Modern science tends to think of brain size as meaning very intelligent. Of course it's not. It's not at all. Empathy can be defined as looking through each other's eyes. For us to truly know and understand another being, we need to be able to look through their eyes, and see the world from their perspective without thinking about it. And children are very, very good at this. Children have an automatic connection with animals because they are free of lots of ideas or expectations. And animals tune in very easily to kids as well. There's this natural, instinctive communication. So all the adults in the audience, be wise and listen to your children and what they're saying about the animals and the plants, because they're picking up messages directly. Particularly the younger the child is and the less language is interfered, the more direct knowing is available. Here are some brief examples of compassion and caring between the different species. It's well known the great relationship between elephants and their keepers. That's an orphaned elephant in Africa. These young elephants, if they're orphans, they die from heartbreak unless they have someone with them 24/7. The bottom picture is of an orca and a dog having a little greeting. And the tiger was in the Thailand zoo. His mother rejected him when he was born, and the only other animal who had young at the time was a pig. So they put him with the pig, and he grew up with his little piglet brothers and sisters, and now they live happily together. And he doesn't think they're food, they're his brothers and sisters. So what do we use telepathic communication for? We use it for all sorts of ways to try to understand animals better so that we can help them meet their wishes or their needs. We can use it for helping veterinarians understand their physical symptoms or describe their physical symptoms to find out what's wrong with them or what care they need. It can help with resolving behavioral issues and various distressing things. Most importantly, though, it can enhance our relationship with them. This was a cheetah I worked with in Canada who'd broken her leg and had to be confined indoors for quite a few months. And with telepathic communication, I was able to keep her calm and help her understand why she had to go through this very terrible imprisonment, because it was for her own good. And from time to time, we'd let her, look out the window and see where she might be able to walk again one day, which she did. And these photos were taken in Mozambique by a young marine biologist who attended one of my workshops. And a few months later, while snorkeling in the warm ocean, he saw a whale shark that is the sea's biggest fish, just meters and meters and meters long. You'll see in a moment, relative to a human. And she had fishing line caught around her tail and a hook in her tail, which was obviously reducing her ability to swim so well. So he remembered what he'd learned about being calm and still inside and connecting with her. He explained to her what he was going to do and that he meant well. And then he swam up to her. See how large she is? That's just her tail, and he's an adult man. It was potentially very dangerous. If she had just swished her tail, she could have knocked him unconscious. But he had explained his intention, and he got a feeling of a yes from her. And this is what he wrote about it afterwards. I told the lady, meaning the shark, exactly what I was going to do. After removing the hook, I actually swam up right next to her face and showed her the hook. She calmly gave this long, paused wink. I'll never forget her expression. So it's very helpful to calm animals down if they are in distress or if a bird has fallen out of the nest. And it's not about physical expression. It's not about facial expression. It's not about interpreting behavior, because that is our minds busy trying to interpret things. It's definitely not about body language. When us humans see an animal in a certain posture or certain body language, we tend to assume certain things. It's really not about body language. Animals are doing what they're doing for their reasons. How does it work? Every day we have moments of intuition. We have little gut feelings or little hints or sudden messages fall into our head, and we need to learn to trust those. That's really what it's about. And it's about the energy behind the concepts, not the actual words. So sending is automatic. Animals send, we send information, and it's really not about the words. Okay. Us humans tend to hang up on the idea of words, but if we're genuinely in distress and are saying help or ouch or I'm really sore, I'm really unhappy, animals understand the feeling and the energy of it. It doesn't matter what we're actually saying. Luckily, they don't interpret things from a language point of view. And as they say, cats are their own particular species who may not actually talk and definitely are less likely to respond when we want them to. So we need to honor the animals and their species as well. There are simple steps, we'll talk more about this afterwards, but they're very simple steps to intentionally connecting with an animal telepathically or with a plant telepathically. They're very, very simple. So simple that we tend to think, well, they can't be real, or this is too easy. But it's really not a complicated thing. We just have to have our hearts and our minds in the right place. Usually one of the first things to do, therefore, is to relax, to consciously relax. Relaxing the body can help relax the mind, because we need to become still. When our minds are still, we can tap into our deeper knowing, which is the intuition. So being still is very much the first step. Being quiet, not with music or meditation, just being quiet, watching your breathing. And then coming down to being very calm and open, connecting with the heart. It really is about coming down into the wisdom of the heart and to imagine that you're connecting. If you would like, you could have a visualization that imagines you reaching out to connect with the animal. Better to just visualize it than to actually do it, because that might disturb them physically, and that might get your mind all involved in the physical interaction, which it's really not about. It's about being in a quiet space of heart connection. You could imagine reaching out to them, particularly if they're not in the same room as you, because this kind of energy transmission can happen across great distances. The telepathic energy transference is not at all affected by buildings or mountains or distance. You can communicate with a dog in your room or a dog on the other side of the world. But most important is to be quiet. Here at Findhorn, you have very good access to places and practices to instill that. I noticed since my last visit, there's a nice new bright wood sign on the gate of the original garden saying, "Be still and know." And that is really what it's about. If you become still, you know. You know. You don't think about stuff, you just know. And in that space, you can know the moods and the thoughts and the feelings and the states of being of everything around you, from an ant to an elephant, even if they're not around you, from a cauliflower to a tree. It's also about genuinely honoring and having reverence for that other being, not making them smaller than you or less important, but about really respecting them and who they are. And us humans tend to not like some species so much. We tend to have prejudice against things like ticks and mosquitoes. And then because we have a prejudice against ticks, we have a prejudice against the animals who carry ticks, like the deer, and then we don't want them close to us because they might make us sick. And all of these stories and all of these negative thoughts, which only increase our chances of manifesting that very negative thought. If we genuinely understood that, yes, the deer are carrying the ticks and might also become sick from them, we can feel more kindly and understand we're all on the same planet and the same situation. If we understand why animals that raid our vegetable garden are hungry, perhaps, or why they're not getting enough nutrition in the very little wild areas that are left, we might feel more kindly to leaving some rows in our vegetable patch for them, or putting some trees in a different location and saying they're welcome to eat off those. It's about living in harmony with nature, and the most amazing reciprocal relationships are possible. It's also about physical considerations. We need to go quietly and perhaps somewhat camouflaged into nature. One of my favorite animals in Africa is the meerkat. And we can get closer to animals in nature if we are being unobtrusive in the environment, if we're not wearing big, bright colors, if we're not talking loudly or thinking loudly, even if our mouths are shut. So it's about having a quiet way of walking and being. It's about being quiet within. That is truly the only requirement for this at all. And when one is quiet within, the most amazing things can happen. I was sitting on a boat in a channel on the coast of South Africa, and I found out afterwards, a white-throated swallow came and sat on the wire, on the stay of the boat, and I wanted to respect his need for a rest, I thought, so I moved away, and he followed me, and I moved around to the other side of the boat, and he followed me, and eventually I communicated with him, and he was just curious, who are you, and what do you feel like? So I offered my hand so he could feel what I felt like, and he hopped onto my hand. And we had a lovely chat about the weather, literally about the weather, because the weather matters to a young swallow trying to fly across a channel. So amazing things can happen when you're genuinely open and peaceful. Had I been trying to have a connection with that sparrow and within myself reaching and grabbing for it, I bet it wouldn't have happened, because I would have been wanting something of that experience. It comes down to shared awareness. Beyond words, beyond physical action and beyond behavior, it's about being in a space with an animal, with a plant, with a flower, touching or not, and about being in a state of shared awareness. It doesn't always have to be this huge conversation where there's question and answer to and fro. Just sitting quietly in the presence of another is a beautiful communion, even if it's not a communication. And our dear Dorothy has this lovely transmission from the plant kingdom. And this is truly how I experience it as well. We quietly radiate to you, and it is as if you must stop and listen to us. You know, all of nature, all around us, is constantly radiating and being authentic and expressing who they are. All we have to do is slow down and stop long enough to be still, to hear. That's the invitation for all of us in our daily lives. Because we are, on a building block level, all parts of the same universe, exactly the same kinds of parts. We're in this constant flow and motion. So why not enjoy the dance and get to know our dancing partners, every aspect of the plant, animal, mineral, elemental kingdom around us.